Hello, and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large. I think we might have some new viewers coming around on the show because I've certainly had a vast increase in subscribers and Twitter followers and that sort of thing since my appearance on Leah Remini's show, which we'll talk about more later on. And so I think might be some folks coming around and checking out what this podcast is all about. Of course, it's available as a podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, as well as here on YouTube, where we get video views as well because I record it with video. So welcome, everybody, to this show. This Sensibly Speaking podcast is something that I started putting together well over a year ago, and the intention of it was to offer some common sense, rational, critical thinking type commentary on things going on in the world. At first, it was very news-driven and news-oriented, and then I had a partner with me, Ruth McLeod. She's one of my best friends, awesome woman. But then I decided this year to go it alone with Sensibly Speaking 2.0. Because we were getting off too much into very controversial and sort of annoying to some people political chatter and whatnot. And it wasn't the point of this podcast or my channel to be divisive or create a lot of controversy or something like that. I want to inform, I want to educate, and I want to entertain. Those are the things I want to do with my channel, and that's what this podcast is all about. And so here we are at the end of 2016. Quite a tumultuous year. Lots of ups and downs this year, and there's no shortage of memes and videos and things being made right now that people just can't wait for 2016 to be over, and so they can start on 2017 as though, the calendar is some monolithic source of all that is good and bad in the world, when really our calendar is just an arbitrary, assignation of dates and times to how many times we're moving around the sun on this little pale blue dot of ours in this big cosmos. In other words, 2017, 2016, más o menos, 2016 had some significant events that we are going to go over in this show, because I do want to do a year in review here, and I want to just say that I'm not of the club of, oh my God, I just can't wait for this year to be over because it's been so awful. Because I had some really wonderful things happen personally to me this year. There were some significant events that happened in the world that were very good, and my optimistic nature is such that I, will not forget about those things in the face of disasters and potential horrible things that are going to happen in the future. We don't know. We don't know what's coming in the future. We try to predict as best we can, given the information that we have, the indicators that we have, how we look at our politics, how we look at our culture and social activities and whatnot. But truth be told, we're on such a short vision, such a short scope of how we look at things, human beings, and especially us here in the United States, that I think we jump to conclusions that are unwarranted far, far, far too often. And it really helps to get a big, long view of things. And I think that's one reason why a lot of shows and channels and whatnot here at the end of the year will do a retrospective of what happened over this last year, because it's good to look at it, look at a longer term than just yesterday or the day before or last month or something like that. It gives you some perspective, and perspective is important, especially when times look grim. It's so easy to get involved in CNN and MSNBC and all the horrible, awful news that gets thrown at you literally 24/7 on those channels, and forget that statistically speaking, the world is a safer place than it has been in a long, long time. And there's lots of bad news, lots of bad things, lots of bad situations to concentrate our attention on, focus our efforts on, look at trying to deal with or handle in some fashion or another. We take our causes and we move forward on them as best we can as activists or, just regular citizens. And that's all good. We should be doing that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But I think if we lose perspective on where where we're going and what's happening for real, like in a broader sense, then I think we cause our own concerns and anxieties and worries that we don't need to have. And I think that's the only reason I preach that kind of message, is because I want people to be upset. I want people to be mad when they should be. I'm not trying to quell, upset or anxiety or anger when it is the right expression of how you feel about a particular thing. But I don't want that to eclipse the good things too. So that being said, let's do a little retrospective month by month of how things went this last year. Okay, we're going to look at very small things having to do with me, having to do with this show, having to do with Scientology, which really in the big picture is a very small thing. It has the reason, I think one of the reasons why Scientology is important to look at is that it is a microcosm of larger things that are going on or that could go on. It's horrible and awful in Scientology, but it's also can teach us lessons about how we might deal with those things, how we might spot them, how we might, recognize that they're happening, and how we might go about dealing with them in other groups or other situations. Anyway, we're going to dive back and forth in no particular order except time to big events, small events, and look at 2016. This Tony Ortega is a blogger who has the Underground Bunker. He's a journalist. I shouldn't say he's a blogger because he's actually a journalist. And he has been running the Underground Bunker for years now as a daily source of amazing information about the Church of Scientology, its abuses, its survivors, its court cases and legal activities. All kinds of things have come up on the Bunker, and it was one of the first places I started getting straight information about Scientology when I was still in. And Tony now is a friend of mine and somebody who also gets my videos and whatnot and posts them on his blog. So he's been doing a retrospective this year, and I drew from some of his information. In January this year, I'd forgotten about this. Tony and another friend of mine who is known as R.M. Seibert, she and Tony broke a story that had to do with, through various records requests, it was found that Scientology has been applying for thousands of religious worker visas to import workers to the Flag Land base in Florida in Clearwater and to the PAC base, the Pacific base, Sea Org base in Los Angeles, and they've been bringing people over from Russia, Italy, Mexico, Hungary, and Canada. And this has been going on for a long time, but it has never been exposed as involving thousands of people. This is another reason why we know that Scientology is not a rapidly growing, expanding, thriving religious activity. If it were, why would they be needing to import people from Russia to man posts in Clearwater or in Los Angeles? They should have tons of new Scientologists coming on board, experiencing the miracles of Scientology, joining the Sea organization for that lifelong dedicated commitment of 1 billion years, and they should be a growing, expanding concern, but they're not. And so this was a great story on that issue. Also in January, there were some interesting world events. Joaquin Guzman, who was widely regarded as the world's most powerful drug trafficker, was recaptured after he escaped from a maximum security prison. Now that's some good news. Also, along the lines of what I think is good news, was the International Atomic Energy Agency on January 16th announced that Iran had adequately dismantled its nuclear weapons program, allowing the United Nations to lift sanctions. And I know there was a lot of controversy at that time. A lot of Obama haters were down on Obama, if I remember right, if I'm remembering this properly, that this would be allowed, that Iran, oh my God, they're trying to be a world power, they're trying to take over, or they're going to bomb us. Well, I don't know. I haven't seen a whole lot of indications that that's what's in our immediate future. And I think this was, probably some good news. Also in January, you all might remember, was the outbreak of the Zika virus. Not good news. But also, if you look again with a little bit of perspective, not the horrible outbreak, world catastrophe that we imagined it would be, or that rather the news imagined it would be and threw in our face day after day after day after day. Zika virus, Zika virus, Zika virus. It was ridiculous. So also in January, and this is where we're going to hit home as to why a lot of people are saying 2016 was so bad, is there were a lot of deaths of people who were well known. And I'm going to do a little wrap up at the end of this show about this that I think is important to say. But as I go through each month, I'll list out the people who died that month that were, noteworthy and somehow touched my life. Certainly, I mean, there were a lot of people who died, and I'm not going to list all of them. But I did list the people who I felt had touched my life in some way. David Bowie, of course, right? Rock legend, pop legend. Alan Rickman, actor, right? From Harry Potter, from Die Hard, numerous movies, a brilliant actor. I was actually quite upset when I heard that Alan Rickman died, because he was one of my favorite movie actors, and also, as I understood it, a really great guy. Glenn Frey of the Eagles, musician, also died in January this last year. Brilliant musician through the 80s, through the 70s, 80s, 90s. Somebody that I listened to. It had a definite influence on my life, going all the way back. Really, for me, the Eagles were not a huge thing for me in the 70s, but in the 80s, you all might remember Miami Vice, old TV show that was directed by and created by Michael Mann, the filmmaker, and which featured a lot of great music by the original artists who had made the music. And this is Phil Collins and Glenn Frey, who actually even starred on the show. And so he went from Eagles fame to solo fame and just came up with some really great music that definitely had a very positive impact on me. And Abe Vigoda died in January. Now, Abe Vigoda was Fish from Barney Miller back in the 70s. And he was one of those people that you thought were, they were just never going to die, never going to move on. And 2016, he left. All right, now moving on to February, there was some significant news in the Scientology world in February, and this is still to this day in the Scientology world, or for those who are Scientology watchers, or those of us who have been paying a lot of attention to what goes on with the church, this was significant. Monique Rathbun in February fired her entire legal team. Now, I'm going to just read the quote from Tony's blog because he summarizes it best. In August 2013, Monique Rathbun filed a harassment lawsuit against numerous Scientology entities and officials, including church leader David Miscavige. Scientology responded by throwing more than 20 lawyers at the case, which provided some interesting scenes down at the courthouse in quiet Comal County, Texas. Those lawyers followed Scientology's usual scorched earth playbook and threw numerous roadblocks at the suit, including the tactic of trying to get Monique's attorneys disqualified. But Monique's team, Ray Jeffrey, Mark Wiegand, Elliot Cappuccio, and for appeals, Leslie Hyman, knocked back everything Scientology threw at them and were, by all accounts, winning the case. Scientology knew it, And in order to protect Miscavige, the church fell on its sword and made some amazing stipulations in official court briefs, admitting, for example, that it does surveil and investigate former members as a matter of course. Never in decades of litigation had the church made statements so openly admitting to such behavior, an indication of the worry that Miscavige would end up, at some point, under oath in this mess. From May 2014 to November 2015, a full year and a half, the case was on hold as the Texas Third Court of Appeals considered one of Scientology's desperate attempts to derail the lawsuit. But when the appeals court finally ruled, it not only cleared away the church's obstruction, but handed Monique one of the most damning rulings against Scientology in many years. After more than 2 years of preliminary matters, Monique and her husband, former church official Marty Rathbun, were in the driver's seat and were poised to cause some serious pain for Miscavige and his church. And then, just 2 months later, Monique fired all 4 of her attorneys, and, quote, without cause. So if some kind of judgment or settlement still happened, the attorneys would be in line to be paid. After then gamely pursuing the case on her own for a few months, Monique then withdrew it altogether while blaming her former attorneys for blatantly mishandling the lawsuit, a charge that was demonstrably untrue. Months later, we're still completely mystified as to why the Rathbuns badmouthed their attorneys and walked away from a winning case that at least had the potential to yield them a settlement in the millions of dollars. At his blog, Marty Rathbun claimed that there was no settlement at all, and he has left readers guessing as to the reason the lawsuit was dropped. So that's Tony's report on that. And that was huge because here's the thing about that lawsuit. If you didn't get from what I just read here, this lawsuit was big and it was impacting the Church of Scientology in a way that no other lawsuit had. It was being brought by Marty Rathbun's wife, Monique, but also Marty himself had been second in charge of Scientology and all over Scientology's legal handlings since the 1980s when they were fighting for tax exemption. So he knew how Scientology operates, and he had him and, of course, the whole legal team working together were able to predict and outmaneuver the Church of Scientology. And they had even gotten a ruling that David Miscavige was going to have to submit a deposition in writing. He wasn't going to have to appear in court in person, bummer, but he was going to have to be deposed. And this would have been, the next best thing to him showing up in person, and that would have itself been a huge deal. Huge. No one's ever gotten so close to Miscavige. And that is why I'm convinced that right there was the reason that the church, was desperate to get out of that case. And then in February of this year, when everything looked like it was going great guns, suddenly their legal team is fired, and none of us could understand why. It made no sense whatsoever. And Monique and Marty have been less than forthcoming, as Tony says here. And there has been other actions taken later on, which we'll go over when I get to it, by Marty Rathbun that are suspect at best. All right. Now, also in February of this year was some really fun news, actually, in the Scientology watching world, which is that Ross and Carrie's podcast. Now, this is called the Oh No, It's Ross and Carrie. And this podcast is great. These two, Ross Balmer and Carrie Poppy, Ross Blocker, and Carrie Poppy, they don't just talk about going into things that they're going to look into skeptically or sit on the other end of a mic and just criticize. They actually go partake in and do what you would call serious investigative journalism, actually, and go get involved in the groups that they're talking about or the practices that they're talking about. And they've been doing this for years and years. They're great people, a lot of fun. They have a very fun, vivacious spirit to their podcast and to what they do. They don't really take themselves or anything they're doing too seriously. And they decided in the beginning of this year to do a thing on Scientology. And it turned out to ended up being their longest series of investigation, because they spent months going into the Church of Scientology in Los Angeles, doing services, and then going and podcasting about it. And the Scientology didn't catch on for a long time. They did eventually catch on, which was why it was only 9 episodes, because they did end up, getting the boot. But in February is when it was first announced that this was actually happening on Tony's blog, and I ended up getting involved with Ross and Carrie. I met them later on this year, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. On my channel, there was also some interesting news. In February, I had done an interview on a friend of mine, an ex-Scientologist named Shane Waitman. And he is now settled here in Colorado. He's doing great, him and his wife and his kids. But he had been he was born in Paris, grew up in London, in St. Hill, in the Scientology world. He grew up in the Scientology bubble from birth. And it wasn't until I think was about 18 or 19 that he actually finally got out with the help of his now wife, Chrissy. And I interviewed him, and we did, I think it was a 4 or 5 part series, laying out the whole story from beginning to end. And it's still on my channel. It's a great episode. But get this. The 5th episode, the last in the series, was something that Scientology itself stepped in and tried to stop. And they try to do that via Shane's parents, who are still hardcore Scientologists. And they contacted Shane or contacted Shane's sister, who then contacted Shane. They couldn't even do it directly, and tried to get him to not air that last episode of the series. Now, this was on my channel. These were my videos. I had interviewed him actually in 2015, and we waited a while to get him out. And now they were trying to get him to somehow convince me to not air this final episode in the series. So, of course, that's exactly what we did, is we aired the episode, and we gave the whole story to Tony, and he put it up on his blog. That was a fun story to get out. And I also, in February, did a 3-part series with cult recovery therapist Rachel Bernstein, good friend of mine, wonderful woman. This 3-part series that we did actually was about how to deal with family members and friends who are members of destructive cults. And this is really, this is one of those things where you look back at, your body of work, which I don't do a lot. I just keep writing and producing my videos and my work. And I don't often stop and look back at what I've done. And when you're producing on a weekly basis like I am, you forget so much of what you've put out. You just go, wow, yeah, that was pretty good. So anyway, I wanted to mention those videos because I thought that they were something you guys might be interested in. And if you have not heard or seen Rachel on this show or otherwise, this would be a great introduction to her. North Korea launched on February 7th. North Korea launched a long-range rocket into space, violating multiple UN treaties and prompting condemnation from around the world. North Korea is quite literally the largest destructive cult on planet Earth. It's the entire country is led by a destructive cult leader. And if you're looking for the model of how destructive cults work, how they how they enforce their dictates on their members, and how the members really don't feel that they have much of a choice in how to deal with that, look no further than North Korea. In terms of wrapping up February, there were some deaths this month of significance. Edgar Mitchell was the 6th man on the moon. He had been an astronaut. He'd been instrumental in the Apollo 13 salvage. He wasn't on Apollo 13. He was working with ground control, but he had been very much part of that. He died in February. Denise Katrina Matthews, otherwise known as Prince's protege Vanity, also big surprise when she died. All right, so then we come into March. All right, so there was, again, just getting very microcosm here in terms of world events. In March is when my audiobook came out. Now, I had published my first book, and it's not going to be my last. It's called Scientology A to Xenu, an insider's guide to what Scientology is really all about. I self-published that in January, actually, at the end of December of 2015, just days before the new year. I published that, self-published it on Amazon. And I then started getting, I was working during January, February, March on promoting that book, trying to get it, I was doing some podcasts. I was doing any kind of promotion I could think of to do from my own little residence here to get the book out there. And I started getting requests to do an audiobook version, which I didn't even occur to me that people would want an audiobook of my book. And I never had done audiobooks before. I don't listen to audiobooks personally. They're not a big thing for me. But I saw, this is a market. This is something that I'm going to need to do. So as I do with everything, I figured out how to make one, and I recorded it right here in this room, and I published it in March. And it took, weeks and weeks to do the recording. It's a hefty book. And a lot of fun doing it, actually. And I was very surprised at the positive response to it. I get a lot of complaints. Well, I don't get a lot of complaints. I get a few complaints about my voice on my channel. I think it's a silly thing to, be upset about or complain about on my channel is my voice, but some people do that. But many more people had very positive things to say about my audiobook recording, which I had done all myself. So that was kind of fun. Also in March, the book Going Clear, written by Lawrence Wright, was finally published in the United Kingdom. That had been a long coming because the UK has more strict libel laws than the United States does. And so publishers over in the UK are more wary of the litigation that the Church of Scientology could bring against them for, suits. So it was a good deal that a publishing company over in the UK had the balls to go ahead and publish that book. And of course, Scientology did not sue them. And just further proof that Scientology's been pretty defanged in a number of ways. Now also, again, sort of shameless self-promotion here, but a significant event for me in 2016 was I traveled out to California in March, and I interviewed my mother. Now, my mother was a Scientologist, and she had raised me in Scientology. My mom and dad did. They're all out of Scientology now, officially. And so I asked my mom if she would agree for me to interview her. And I traveled out to California, didn't do it over Skype. And we sat down in her living room, and we just talked. And we put up a video camera, and we recorded, and I had some questions, and we talked about raising me with Scientology and how she and my dad got involved with it and what they did with it. And then we talked about how she and I had not been disconnected the whole time that I'd been involved with Scientology, even after she got out of it, how she maintained communication with me. And that was a trick because the church was pressuring me when I was in the Sea organization to disconnect from my mom. So that video series still remains for me one of the most personal and one of the most important video series that I've done. And it is on the front page of my channel if you're curious about that. And, what you see on the videos is live pretty much. There's very little editing that I did of those videos. And we actually, near the end, forgot that the video camera was even there. Because we got into discussing some things that she didn't know about me, that I didn't know about her, and it was pretty significant. So anyway, just plugging that. That was in March. Also in March, in terms of, if that's micro, very, very microcosm, let's look at some macrocosm here of what happened in the big wide world. March was an interesting month. There were some interesting things that happened in March this last year. The ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter was launched by the European Space Agency and a private company, Roscosmos, and that went on a mission to Mars. Now that's significant because, as we'll talk about maybe a little bit later in the show, the Earth's population is not getting any smaller. And I think that personally, I believe that the work being done to get us into space is important. I think it's very important, and I think it's absolutely vital, in fact, to our future survival, that we be investing a lot of resources in this, way more than we are. I think the amount of work being done on this is minuscule compared to what we as a species should be looking at when it comes to where we're going to be 100, 200, 500 years from now. If we expect to still be living as a species, and it is incumbent upon us that we do something to ensure the survival of our species into the future, it's on us. So if we're going to take that responsibility, then I think we really need to take a harder look at what it's going to take to move on past the boundaries of this planet. So I'm glad to see work being done on that. And it's not just Elon Musk or one or two people working on this. There's a lot of people working on it. But we need more, So I have, if in case you guys are new, for those new to my channel, you might not know, I'm a huge Star Wars, Star Trek buff. And I really do believe that Gene Roddenberry put forward a vision of the future with Star Trek that is probably one of the best visions possible for the future of the human race, if we can achieve it. And I sometimes have my doubts, when you get into the minutia of the day-to-day of the craziness that goes on in the world, and you lose sight of the big picture, it's real easy to start wondering whether we're going to survive 2017. But I think we are, and I think that if we are going to, that it's only going to be because we are following the leaders who are leading us in that direction. My personal opinion is that some of our current political leaders are not doing that and have no idea about how to even do that, much less it doesn't even enter their head to do that. But I think that there are some people who are trying to lead us in that direction, and I think we need to be paying a lot more attention to them. So, also this last March, there was the bombing in Brussels, Belgium. There were 32 people killed, 250 people injured, and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant claimed responsibility for those attacks. Unfortunately, it was the first, it would not be the last such attack in 2016. And, what do you say about something like that, except it's the definition of pure insanity to believe that you can forward your cause through such violent activities, or that you are the delusion connected with thinking that they are doing God's work and that they are promised a place in the Holy Land or in some fantasy world of their version of paradise. It's disgusting. It is truly, truly disgusting, and these people are beyond shameful. They are just evil, and I don't know what other words to use to describe those groups of people. They are the extreme of destructive cults. When you look at North Korea, when you look at Scientology, when you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses, when you look at some of the extremist Mormon sects, you are looking at the seeds of what becomes ISIL or the Islamic State, right? That's what you're looking at. And I think that's one reason why, while I talked earlier about Scientology being small, relatively insignificant in the world, the lessons it has to teach us are how we can prevent things like the Islamic State from happening in the first place. But we have to pay attention, and we have to be proactive about doing something about it. It takes proactive motion to stop these things and nip them in the bud. And unfortunately, that didn't happen in the Middle East. It is a religion, out of control. in these groups, and we see the result of fanatical extremist behavior, and it's awful. Is the belief at fault? I don't think so. It's the extremism that is generated around that belief. So that's the target. And there are people who create that extremism, and they're the target. That's, I don't, in other words, I don't think all Muslims are to blame for the extremists, just like I don't think all Christians are to blame for the Westboro Baptists or the extreme Christian militants who want to blow things up or want to create a revolution here in the United States because they think their Christian values are being threatened by, the LGBT community or abortion or something. Those people are just as whacked out of their heads. So it's not, they all have this shared belief in a Christian God or an Islamic God or something. That belief all by itself doesn't create extremism any more than a belief in Santa Claus creates extremism. It's an individual or individuals who take that belief and do things with it to people that creates extremism. And that's what we have to be watching for, and that's what we have to be aware happens. We have to be aware of the symptoms of it and what those things look like, and then we have to take action against that. Okay. All right. And we end off March with Nancy Reagan died in March, and Gary Shandling, the comedian, died in March. That was a bit of a bummer. All right, moving into April. All right, so let's go over again first some microcosm look at some Scientology stuff. And there was some, there were ups and downs in April here. This was a real up. After 2 abortive attempts, which were stopped by the Church of Scientology, Phil and Willie Jones put up their Call Me billboard in Los Angeles, and they started a website called Stop Scientology Disconnection. Now, Phil and Willie are real heroes. They did a GoFundMe. They got the money together, and they put together, they got a graphic artist, and they did this billboard that said, Call Me, which was directed to Scientologists. It said a few things more than that, too, but it was aimed squarely at the disconnection policy of the Church of Scientology. Phil and Willie Jones have lost a son and a daughter to Scientology. The son and the daughter will not talk to them because the church says they can't. No other reason. Just that. It really is that simple. And Phil and Willie did not want to put up with that, did not think that that was right, and so they took a public stance against it. And that's, what I'm talking about in terms of, some proactive move to fight against the oppression of Scientology. And of course, this year there was a lot more of that, which we'll get into. In fact, also in April, Louis Theroux's movie, My Scientology Movie, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. And I did a review on that movie later. Not the best movie, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, also in April 2020 on ABC News, did a show about Scientology and Ron Miscavige Sr.'s upcoming book, it's been released, which his book was called Ruthless. And Ron Miscavige Sr. is the father of David Miscavige, the current leader of Scientology. And surprise, surprise, who does the Church of Scientology trot out to be their spokesman for this show? No less than tax attorney Monique Yingling. And she now, apparently, she's never been a Scientologist, has never had Scientology beliefs, but has been working for the Church of Scientology since the 1980s. Probably one of the single worst spokespeople you could possibly roll out. But she showed up at the 2020 studios with muffins in hand, cooked for the staff, and said, I'm here to talk for the Church of Scientology. And ABC News is not an organization I have a lot of positive things to say about when it comes to their coverage of the Church of Scientology, because they had actually filmed for that episode they'd gotten a whole gaggle of people together who had testimonials about the fact that the Church of Scientology had enforced disconnection on their family, on them, and destroyed their families. I think they had 6 or 7, maybe 8 people there from to give those testimonials. ABC totally cut that out of the 2020 show. No sign of it at all. And they gave a whole bunch of time to Monique Yingling, probably measuring it by the second, so that they gave equal time to Scientology. I think Leah's show is giving a more accurate or a better idea of how much time the Church of Scientology should be given when it comes to responding to things. But I will say the fact that an actual warm-bodied human being, maybe warm-blooded, showed up at the studio to talk for the Church of Scientology, they probably felt that was a total coup, because Scientology hasn't had an official spokesman since 2011, when Tommy Davis, who we'll talk about in a bit, left Scientology, and he was the last actual official spokesperson for the church. So anyway, Scientology, of course, did everything that I said they were going to do in attacking Ron Miscavige Sr. and anyone else who says anything about them. I'd actually posted a video just before this episode talking about that. And, of course, Scientology has no other tactic but to ad hominem. And Amy Scobie, who's a former Sea Org member and Scientologist and was featured on Leah's show, tweeted out at that time when Monique was on the show, Monique Yingling, she said, "Yingling should get thrown overboard in her lawyer suit and see how she likes the ecclesiastic justice she's defending." Good tweet, Amy. All right. Now, as far as other things that happened in April, I put a note here. I sang karaoke for the first time. No eye rolling. Hey, stop that. It was actually a lot of fun. And let's see here. Oh, yes. April is when the Panama Papers were broken as a news story. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and the German newspaper, whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, published a set of 11.5 million confidential documents from the Panamanian corporate Mossack Fonseca that provides detailed information on more than 214,000 offshore companies, including the identities of shareholders and directors, and those shareholders and directors included quite some famous people. This was a bit of a scandalous news story for a while, and then, of course, died out, and now you don't hear anything about the Panama Papers, which is a shame because there's quite a bit of exposure of some very important people in those Panama Papers, and I was actually expecting to see a lot more from that news story than what happened. In April, probably one of the most tragic deaths of this year, Prince died. And Prince was, of course, an iconic musician, genius, was a person who was very, very skilled as a musician. Really hit me hard, and it hit a lot of other people as well. Also that month in April, country singer Merle Haggard died, a legend in the country world, certainly not somebody to be forgotten about. Doris Roberts, actress, died, very famous from a number of sitcoms and movies. And this was a real tragedy as well. Peyton Oswalt's wife, Michelle McNamara, also died, and she was far too young. That was a real personal tragedy for Peyton. He's talked about it since then, and of course is surviving and is raising his daughter. But that one really hurt. I really felt for him because she went way too early. All right. Also in May, Ron Miscavige Sr.'s book Ruthless was published. Huge blow to Scientology. Huge threat to David Miscavige. He hated that. And of course, he'd been having his father followed and investigated and surveilled for years after Ron Miscavige Sr. left Scientology. He literally escaped. And David Miscavige didn't like that too much, right? Because this is his father. Who knows what horrible things he might say. Well, congratulations, David Miscavige. You had him followed around by a couple people who had rifles in the back of their car. And so Ron Miscavige Sr.'s response to learning about that was to write a tell-all. write his memoir about that. So once again, David Miscavige causing his own worst enemies to be created through his own actions, just like happened with me and almost every other Scientology critic in existence. You know, it's an amazing story that just keeps being repeated, that they make their own worst enemies. And also in May, and this is just a little, it's almost a footnote story because it's so insignificant to the world at large. The Scientology Media Productions facility opened, not with a bang, but with a whimper. 6 months later, here we are with not a single production having come out of Scientology Media Productions, except unless, of course, you want to count their hate websites against me and other critics. Maybe those are what they consider really great products that they're pushing out. But Scientology sold this facility on to the Scientologists. They bought the old KCET studios in Los Angeles, just a few blocks away from that big blue complex. And they fundraised millions of dollars from Scientologists on the promise that they would open this facility with a 24/7 Scientology TV channel, Scientology radio station, Scientology internet media being produced like hand over fist, right? And Scientology was finally going to have its day on public media, right? Well, guess what? Here we are, 6 months later, nothing. Crickets. Big surprise. I totally predicted it. I made a whole video about it. Nothing coming out of Scientology Media Productions. We now just refer to it as SUMP, SMP. But there you go. They didn't even have any celebrities at their opening. It looked like a bit of a rushed affair. And so, you know, that was the good news that David Miscavige had to launch in May. All right. In the world at large, there was a plane crash. Egyptian Air 804 crashed in the Mediterranean. And former Chilean President Habre was sentenced to life in prison for crimes against humanity committed during his tenure from 1982 to 1990. So again, justice was slow, but there you go. You know, you're going to go be a dictator and do horrible things to people. It's not going to turn out so well for you. In June of this last year was when Ruth and I went to the Reason Rally in Washington, D.C., and that was not at all what we had really hoped it would be. It was fun. It was interesting. We met some interesting folks. We listened to some interesting speeches, but, you know, the organizers on that really didn't do that bang up of a job. There were not nearly as many people there as could have or should have been, and not exactly a big, huge voice in the atheist skeptic community when it comes to, you know, being a mover and shaker there. And I think that rally showed the difference between the Reason Rally this last year and the Reason Rally that happened, I think it was 4 years before, was a really a solid indicator of the divisiveness that exists within the atheist skeptic community over women's issues, social issues. You know, I'd say women's issues, really, it's all kinds of social issues. It's not just feminism, but when that group decided, when a certain, you know, number of people in that group decided to, you know, start making atheism and skepticism about political issues or social justice issues, they caused a pretty large schism in that group. And it really hasn't been the same since. And this is all something I came into not knowing a whole lot about any of it. I just really liked the idea of skepticism and had adopted the idea of agnosticism and atheism as a religious outlook because I don't, you know, I'm sort of just like figuring things out as I go here, and I'm not going to go join some other cult after coming out of Scientology for so many decades, right? That would be the silliest thing for me to do. So, you know, am I going to be an atheist for the rest of my life? I don't know. But that's the label I use right now. But I have not been overly impressed with how that group has moved its cause forward, because I don't think it's really figured out what its cause is. Even I'm part of that group. So it's been kind of interesting watching this and being part of this. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm criticizing anybody personally. I'm talking about, a movement or a group of people who, have this common belief or this common idea and want to see positive change in our culture as a result of these beliefs. They want to see like separation of church and state more, right? They don't want to see so much Christian influence in the United States, for example. Well, good on you. But, if you guys can only, rally a few thousand people at a time for these causes, then, this is not moving forward at any kind of rapid clip. And it's going to be quite a while before we're going to see any such positive change if this organization, if this group doesn't get organized better. That was pretty much my takeaway from the Reason Rally. In June is when Scientology decided to launch a new cover for the book Battlefield Earth, which was L. Ron Hubbard's magnum opus from 1980. It was a science fiction work that he thought would, be a bestseller, and it was a bestseller in the 80s. Not a great book. I read it a few times when I was in Scientology, and of course they made it into a movie. John Travolta forwarded that effort. I've done a whole movie review of that on my channel. One of the worst movies ever made, period. But, here's the delusion that Scientology lives in, is they really think that after everything that's happened since all the criticism, all the exposés, all the stuff that's come out about Scientology over the years, ever since Anonymous in 2008, blew things up internationally. Scientology is just the most toxic thing you can imagine. They really think that by reissuing a book, Battlefield Earth, with a new cover, and somehow trying to popularize this with a few local events, like as they held a big event on Hollywood Boulevard, to announce this big book being released, this new book being released, they really think that that's somehow going to gain L. Ron Hubbard a positive name in the world. They think that by gaining acceptance for L. Ron Hubbard, they open the door to people looking into and getting involved in Scientology. This is how far gone these guys are. Now, some other news that happened in June that has much more wide scope and consequences was Brexit. Brexit happened in June. That was when the United Kingdom voted in a referendum to leave the European Union. Now, I do not live in the UK. I've never been there. I do not even pretend to understand all the ramifications and consequences of that vote. But it was a big one. It was a big deal, and it has yet to be enacted. And so it's been 6 months, and there's been a lot of chatter back and forth, but it's not like you get a do-over on a vote like that. And so it's going to be enacted in this next year, and there's been a lot of media very much doom and gloom about that decision. So I'm more concerned personally about the personal toll that might be taken on those who live in the UK who might need to leave the UK because of the consequences of that action. As I understand it, some people who live there now and have lived there for many, many years are going to get the boot. I think that's a shame. But like I said, I don't know all about it, and I'm not going to pretend to. But I do know that was a massive event that happened in June. And also, of course, ISIL claims responsibility for attacking an airport in Istanbul, killing 45 and injuring around 230 others. Yay. Go ISIL. All right, really making a positive impact on the world. Muhammad Ali died in June. He led a long life, had enacted social change, had been a tremendous inspiration for literally millions of people, and was a man who did not back down from what he felt was right. And you really look to that kind of strength and that kind of role model for how we should be taking more proactive measures ourselves. And boy, he's really going to be missed. But a long, fruitful life Muhammad Ali led. So rolling into July is there was a death that not a lot of people necessarily are going to know about or remember, and that was Steve Fouth, who was also known as Sarge. He died at 70 years old of heart and kidney ailments, and he is somebody that we owe in the Scientology world a big debt of gratitude to, because he coughed what L. Ron Hubbard's final days were actually like. He was one of 3 people who were around that time period, around that area, for years he was living with L. Ron Hubbard in seclusion in Creston, California, along with Pat and Annie Broker. Now, Annie Broker has since died, and Pat Broker ain't talking. And I don't know where he is or what he's doing, but he's not coming out of hiding to say anything about what his experiences were during that time. So Sarge was the only person we had, and he spoke to Marty Rathman, who wrote in his book about LRH's final days, and he spoke to Lawrence Wright, who also wrote, of course, Going Clear, and detailed what Sarge told him there. And Sarge was somebody who loved L. Ron Hubbard, and I don't know that he really ever changed his attitude about it, yet he was still willing to talk about the man in human terms and really give the actual story of what happened to Ron as he descended into what can only be described as total madness and died. So that he died, in July. Phil and Willie Jones put up a second billboard in Clearwater. In your face, Scientology. And how many of you people remember that in July is when Pokemon Go was going full tilt boogie? Any of y'all still playing that? Yeah, I didn't think so. And this is something that happened in July that I thought was significant. We were presented with a real Sophie's choice this last year politically. Nobody was really happy about Hillary Clinton as a candidate, and this was one of the reasons why. You may recall Deborah Wasserman Schultz and Hillary Clinton were caught colluding and against Bernie, against anybody else really, in order to make sure that Hillary was the front runner and was going to be the DNC's candidate. Bernie had started a real movement, and if Hillary hadn't been colluding with Deborah Wasserman Schultz, I wonder whether she would have actually ended up being the candidate or not. We can't tell. We won't know. Whatever. I'm not necessarily implying that there was voter fraud or something like that. I'm just talking pure influence, right? When you have the head of the DNC and a potential candidate colluding to make sure she's the candidate, that's its own kind of fraud right there. And in this case, they were caught doing this, and not only caught, but Deborah Wasserman Schultz then stepped down as the head of the DNC, only to show up on Hillary Clinton's staff days later. Like, in your face, we're so corrupt, we don't care how much you know about how corrupt we are, because we're so sure we're going to win this election that it won't even matter. Right? That's the message that came from that. And that disgusted me. I was really, really uncool with that move. And it's something I wanted to comment on because I thought it was worthy of something to remember as to why it is that, people might think there's a problem with Hillary Clinton, right? When Hillary and even President Obama gave public statements of support to Deborah Wasserman Schultz for her actions, well, wrong move, guys. Totally wrong move. Absolutely shameless. And, so now we have the result of, Hillary lost. It was a close race, and she lost, right? Not by the popular vote, but by the electoral vote. And it's moves like that might have even kept a lot of people home and abstaining from voting, right? Because I can't be the only person who was disgusted by that and by other things that Hillary did. Like, come on. So, all right. Also in July, director Michael Cimino died. He was the maker of the classic movie, The Deer Hunter. And legendary TV writer-director Gary Marshall also died. And he was responsible, of course, for Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Odd Couple, tons and tons of shows. All right. So coming into August, we're going to talk about Tommy Davis. First, we're going to mention that the Church of Scientology Ideal Org in Harlem opened in August. And this was interesting only because it took them like 15 years to get the bloody thing opened, if not longer, actually. I remember when I was in Scientology back in 2000 hearing about Harlem Org and how we needed to get Harlem going. So finally in 2016, they opened this thing. But to me, it really highlighted the fact that there has been a real schism within the Nation of Islam, which has been a group that has allied with the Church of Scientology, and many of its members have done Dianetics and Scientology services. But there is also a very vocal group within the NOI who have broken off from that and think that L. Ron Hubbard is the white devil, and why is Farrakhan aligning himself with these people, and this is completely off the rails. And they have done quite a bit of speaking out against Scientology, and it was interesting, and so now Scientology's opened up this Ideal Org in Harlem. Well, are we hearing any, fantastic feats of wonder and delight coming out of the black community because of Scientology's influence there? Nope. Crickets again. But more importantly, again, on the underground bunker, there was an interesting story presented about what happened to former church spokesman Tommy Davis. And I've been asked about this, so I thought I'd comment on it here, where people would be the last place people would look for it. But in August of this year is when it came out that Tommy Davis has living it up, working for Australian billionaire James Packer, and he is living in Los Angeles. Tommy is now the general manager of Packer's company, Consolidated Press Holdings, and that includes helping to run Rat Pack Entertainment in Hollywood. And Rat Pack Entertainment is a production company that's Brett Ratner and James Packer. And, not bad for a failed Sea Org exec who left in disgrace and who's now probably trying to engender himself to James Packer, who is a billionaire, to get him back onto Scientology lines. Packer was talked to and influenced by Tom Cruise, no less, years ago, started doing some Scientology services, and then went, no, not for me, and he left. Well, now he's got Tommy Davis working for him, and what do you think Tommy's agenda is? Now, in case you're thinking that Tommy is just, trying to make a go of things, and maybe he's not even a Scientologist anymore, au contraire. This is actually an object lesson, right, in how Scientology works to keep amassing tons of money, right? Because it is all about the money. And, if you have somebody like a Bob Duggan, who's a billionaire, right? Or you can get somebody like James Packer on board, then you don't have to keep fleecing, thousands and thousands of poor people who you're making poor. In other words, that's the Scientology public who just get worked over constantly to give anything and everything they can to Scientology. When you can just concentrate your efforts on a couple of these whales and get them to give over millions and millions of dollars at a shot, your future is assured, from this point forward. And that's David Miscavige's strategy. He doesn't care about your day-to-day Scientologist. He bilks them, but he's really interested in these big whales. And so Tommy Davis is a man on a mission to get James Packer back on board. I am absolutely positive that is the case. And proof that Tommy has not moved on, by the way, is not only, as he said in deposition, that he is still a Scientologist, but he's even introduced a guy named Michael Doven as his best friend. And Michael Doven is a guy who used to work with and for Tom Cruise, and he's a well-known Scientology spy and celebrity hanger-on. He just hangs out with celebrities and tries to mooch off them. So that is something else that came to light this last August. Really put very there were photos shown on Tony's blog and whatnot. And it really made it clear that Tommy Davis has been a busy little beaver, not being coming to his senses at all in terms of his Scientology exposure, but is in fact using his Scientology connections to live the high life. So, well done, Tommy. And then, also August is when I interviewed Yuval Leor right here, about L. Ron Hubbard's theory that Yuval had about L. Ron Hubbard suffering from temporal lobe epilepsy. And that was a theory that I still think explains so much of Hubbard's behavior and motivations. And it just makes a ton of sense. If you haven't watched that podcast, I really recommend that you do so, because if you want to understand why, how, what was L. Ron Hubbard thinking, this is actually one of the first theories put forward that makes total sense to me about why somebody could do the things that L. Ron Hubbard did in a way that just nothing else has ever made sense. I mean, sure, you can go, yeah, he was a megalomaniac, he was a narcissist, he was a this, he was a that. Well, great, but why? Like, what explains that? What drove that? What motivated that? Temporal lobe epilepsy is a theory that makes a lot of sense with that. And if you listen to Yuval talk about that, it makes sense. So anyway, that happened. Also in August, let's see, in the big wide world, we had, the Summer Olympics, of course, were held in Brazil. And also in Brazil, just later that month, the Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached. That was a big deal. I'm not even being sarcastic. That was like, whoa. That doesn't happen every day. And deaths in August were Kenny Baker, the actor who motivated or who was, the actor behind R2-D2 in the Star Wars movies, and of course Kenny Baker was in many other movies. And real tragedy, Gene Wilder died. And Gene Wilder, of course, Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, Willy Wonka, classic, iconic role, way better than Johnny Depp. Anyway, classic comedian, classic actor, and a real loss to the world when Gene Wilder died. Now, September saw some interesting things start to happen in the Scientology world. First off, I mentioned Marty Rathbun's case almost from the get-go. And now we come forward to September. And Marty started publishing earlier than September. Marty started publishing some pretty bizarre articles that started putting forward the idea that Tony Ortega and critics of Scientology were part of an anti-Scientology cult and that had formed their own cult. And of course, this is a ridiculous assertion on a number of levels. I mean, there's a number of reasons why this assertion just doesn't hold water at all. One of them being that none of us are a destructive cult leader. We don't follow the orders of anybody in what we're doing. Tony Ortega does not answer to the same master I answer to, because none of us answer to any master. We are our own people and we are doing our own things. So how this is a cult, I don't even know. But then, come September here, Marty started publishing stuff that was a direct attack against Scientology critics, starting with an article against Ron Miscavige Sr. and his memoir, the book Ruthless. A few days later, he eviscerated Louis Theroux's movie, My Scientology Movie. And of course, Marty Rathbun is the primary component of that movie. And he was on board there and working with Louis and his production team, trying to explain Scientology, oversaw reenactments of his time in Scientology, and which were, the most powerful parts of the movie. And now here is, before the movie is officially broadly released, here's Marty trying to put as distance between himself and the production as possible. And he starts defending David Miscavige. Like, what? Like he started defending David Miscavige in his articles. And this is also the month, and I just have to comment on this, that Marty decided to write an article against me. And this was the very first time that I had a critical piece against me actually published on the internet. Well, I'm sorry, it's not the very first time. It was the first time in something that mattered, to put it that way. And this was an article called "How Gullible Can One Get?" And it was an interesting preview of how the Church of Scientology itself would attack me in their more recent website against me. I'll just give one quote here where Marty apparently said, "It would be difficult to imagine more inflated airs of self-absorbed arrogance than this fellow manages to put on, nor a mind as infected with hive mentality." Interesting positioning, because it happens to be the same positioning that the Church of Scientology itself used in their hate website against me. So that was some fun from September. Also in September is when I started my critical merchandise work. That's when I started making shirts and stuff to try to, put something out there that people might be interested in that would promote critical thinking, logic, and reason. And of course, poking some fun at Scientology too. And I have my critical merchandise website out there, which you guys can check out. Now, in September, some very significant world events occurred. In fact, probably one of the most significant world events for, again, our future happened when the US and China on September 3rd, who are together responsible for 40% of the world's carbon emissions, both ratified the Paris Global Climate Agreement. Now, that is a big deal. And I'll tell you right now, that just better not get unratified or ducked out of by President Trump, because that would be one of the single biggest mistakes he could possibly make, short of, pressing the button or something to start a nuclear war. That would be a big one. This was a huge deal. And, regardless of whether you believe in climate change, which is really as silly as saying you believe in gravity, but whether you believe in man-made climate change or not, whether you think that's a thing or not, what harm does it do to reduce carbon emissions on this planet? None. It does not hurt a thing. And it is a very important move for our future survival that we take very, very fast and proactive action in this direction. So that was probably one of the, and you want to talk about long-term activities and big-scale actions, that was a big one. That was one of the biggest ones of 2016, and it's something that we definitely need to continue moving forward on. Also that year, also in September, on September 9th, North Korea conducted its fifth and reportedly largest nuclear test. South Korea called it maniacal recklessness, and I agree. Again, nuclear arms in the hands of a destructive cult leader are probably one of the single biggest threats to our safety and security in this world. And North Korea is a pipsqueak little nation that is fighting for its survival by rattling its saber, because that's what its destructive cult leader, whose name I can't even pronounce, I'm not even going to get into, the madman who runs North Korea, believes that is the way to ensure his survival. It's bully think, and typical of a destructive cult leader that he would think that detonating nuclear weapons and such shows what a big boy he is, and how powerful they are in North Korea, and how they're a force to be reckoned with. Well, great. Between them and ISIS. So September also saw my posting of what I think is probably, next to the one I was mentioning with my mom, probably the single most important video series I've done so far in terms of an interview was with Larissa Smith and her parents, Tim and Sylvia DeWall. Started posting that in September. And there were some real losses in September. The Canadian writer of a book called Shoeless Joe, W.P. Kinsella, died, and that book became the movie Field of Dreams, which just happens to be one of my most favorite movies ever, 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 ever. Not at all about baseball. You don't have to like baseball to like that movie. It's an amazing movie. So then we come up to October, and in one of my most proud moments, now this was a real pleasure for me this last year, one of my listeners, who's a school teacher, sent me a picture where she was using one of my critical thinking videos in her college class. And not only that, but it was a college class that was in a school in San Jacinto, California. And if you're not familiar with the geography of California, Hemet, California is in San Jacinto, California. Hemet, California is where the International Scientology base is located. So, in your face, Scientology, excuse me, my critical thinking videos are being used to teach the kids outside of the double barbed wire gates you people are keeping folks in and ignorant about the world. Well, we're teaching them about critical thinking right outside your gates. October was also the release of my Scientology movie in the UK, and I managed to get a copy of that and watch it and posted my own movie review of that. Again, could have been better. I thought that there was a lot of wasted potential there in that film. Louis Theroux actually got back to me on my review and, of course, disagreed with some of what I had to say, but was happy to hear that I had posted a review about it and agreed with some of my points. So I was happy to hear back from Louis Theroux on that. Now, of course, November's big news was Donald Trump was elected as president. I have no comment on the matter at this time other than to say that I am waiting to see what happens with his administration, but I will say that so far the transition team and appointments he has made have not impressed. And I believe I have good reason to be concerned about some of those appointments, but we will see what happens. Also in November, Leah Remini went on the Ellen Show and other media promoting her upcoming series on A&E, which of course we now know all about. I got an advanced preview of the show and managed to post a review about it in November. Very positive. I love the show. I had no idea at that time that I was going to be on the show, by the way. I had no connection to it at all other than, seeing that advanced screening of it. So anyway, so that was a good time. In November, other than, the huge presidential election and various things, we did lose some folks. Big loss. Leonard Cohen, legendary singer and songwriter, died. Character actor Robert Vaughn died, somebody who was definitely significant in a number of things I had seen and growing up as a kid and over the years. And Fidel Castro died. Wow, not a big loss to the world as far as I'm concerned. Well, December was just this last month, so all I really want to comment on here was that I had a really great time going out to LA and being on Leah's show. That was really an experience and a half, meeting her and working with her and Mike and interacting with the whole production crew and whatnot. And I'm very hopeful that there will be a season 2 of that show, and and who knows if there's any future involvement with that. And of course, in December, we had some, again, tragic losses. John Glenn, the famous astronaut, died. A real American hero, no question about it. It's the only word to use to describe that man. Alan Thicke, celebrity, died. Zsa Zsa Gabor died. And massive losses with George Michael, the legendary singer, died. Richard Adams, the author of Watership Down, which is a classic by any metric, died. And Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds died within. Mother and daughter died within a day of each other. And there are simply no words that I still have for that. It was just a tragedy and quite awful. So really, this was a year of loss and a year of gain, as is life, it's quite an exercise to review, what you've been up to in the last year and see what mattered and what didn't, what you did that you remember now and things that you've forgotten. And seeing that, the big picture does really matter more than the immediate gratification or short-term concerns. And that's a point I wanted to make because I don't want any of us to forget that. I think that's an important point. With the number of deaths that we had this year, there's a lot of people who are raging about how bad they feel. And rightly so. I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. But I would like to point out that the world population at this point, just to get a real macrocosm look at planet Earth as we end off the year 2016, there are 7.5 billion people in this world. This year, there were 143 million people born, while there were roughly 60 million deaths. So here's the thing. We had more life than we had death. And amongst all those people who were born are tomorrow's celebrities, leaders, innovators, creators, the people that are going to lead us, in 10, 20, 30, 40 years are the people who were born this year. So, there was tragedy, there was loss, but I think it would behoove all of us to kind of come out of the 2016 just sucked, and 2017 is going to be so much better. Maybe. I don't know that looking at it that way is really the best way to go about it, is kind of my point. There were good things, there were bad things, and in 2017 there will be good things and there will be bad things. Amongst some of the good things, I will say, are going to be a few promises I am making to you now. I had put some projects out there for this last year that I did not finish. I worked on. I moved them all down the road on all of them, but didn't finish them. And I am going to finish them this year. In fact, as early as I can this year. I've got that e-meter video that have talked about off and on. It is well along on being scripted. I needed to consult with 2 electrical engineers, a medical doctor, a psychologist, and a lie detector, a polygraph administrator, all this year. I've never had to engage with so many experts on things in order to put together research for a video. I like to, do my research and I talk to people all the time, but never that many different people from various different fields. But that's what it takes in order to actually lay out the facts of what's going on with this device, because there's so much myth and mystique connected to it in the Scientology world. And I want to really lay all that crap to rest. So that's why it's taken, so very long amongst all the other projects and things that I've been working on this year. So I promise that this video will get done in this new year, probably in the next couple months. Also, I've got another book I'm going to write. I meant to get it done, but, time and the projects that I had delayed me on this. So this book about the RPF will come out this next year. And I have another special project involving an entirely different destructive cult. Bill Gothard's Christian cult will be the feature story for some videos this year as well. And that's lined up to happen. So who knows what else will come in 2017? Hopefully lots of other good things. It has been a real joy to experience 2016 for me in a number of ways. My channel has gotten larger. The amount of exposure I have been able to bring to Scientology myself and assisting others has grown. Leah Remini has really brought the battle to their doorstep late this year, and that has been really, really great to watch. There's, believe me, more coming in 2017. There definitely is. So we've got some good stuff on the horizon, and whether we survive 2017 because of our political leaders or not has yet to be seen, but I have a positive outlook about it. I don't think that, for those of you out there who think that Donald Trump is, as the Antichrist or something, I don't quite look at it the same way. I think that our checks and balances are in place for a reason. I'm much more concerned about Congress and the Supreme Court than I am about Donald Trump. And I think we all should be. And I think we need to pay a lot more attention to those bodies and what they are doing right now. So Trump's tweets are interesting and a little bit stupid, to be completely honest. But I think that that is more distraction than it is a cause for real central concern when we look at some of the appointments that are being made and what those might foretell. Now, for those of you who are Trump supporters out there, don't be personally insulted by the fact that I am uncertain about our future and that I don't agree with everything the man says. That doesn't mean I'm insulting you personally. So please don't take it that way. We'll see what happens. Like I said, I'm kind of waiting and seeing. But I figured as we roll into this new year, and there are a lot of people who have a lot of anxiety and concern about our current political situation, that I would try to voice, some notes of caution and reason in that general situation. So thanks a lot for sticking with me through this whole retrospective. I hope you enjoyed it and that it was entertaining and informing for you. It was certainly interesting for me to do. And I will see you guys next week in 2017, and we'll see what we have to roll out then.